Well, the way the new government has responded to calls for a conversation on small nuclear reactors has been amateur and brainless. It seems that Anthony Albanese's lifetime opposition to anything nuclear powered has infected his front bench, and they won't even consider the whole concept of new technology. They laugh and smirk, as Chris Bowen has done many times at the idea, despite the fact 30 of the world's largest nations, by estimate, are on the cusp of adopting the new technology. The latest journalist to research and advocate for SMRs is Claire Lehmann, who joins me on set in the studio right now. Claire, well written. That article on Friday that you wrote in The Australian, I've been wanting to talk to you about what you have discovered. Firstly, what people think of when they think of nuclear is the frightening events of Chernobyl. The 1950s technology applied to Chernobyl is nothing like what we are talking about today, is it?
No, there's nothing like it, and we have to remember that Chernobyl occurred in Soviet Russia, where the regulations are completely different to what we would expect in an advanced Western economy, and the real example of nuclear technology today is France. Something like 70 or 80% of their electricity generation comes from nuclear power. They have so much cheap electricity, they export it. They haven't had any meltdowns which have caused any big problems in terms of health or the environment. And, because they made that decision decades ago to invest in nuclear, they've got dividends now in terms of prosperity, in terms of security. Whereas their neighbour, Germany, they're freezing in the middle of winter. They're reliant on Russian gas. Their bet on renewables has been a bad one because, as we all know, renewables are not reliable when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. And the other unfortunate thing about renewables is that they seem to be driving electricity prices up.
Yes.
Anywhere where they're mandated for aggressively. And not only that, they're not that effective at reducing emissions. So if we're really serious about reducing our emissions, which we are, we need to have all of the options on the table.
And I couldn't think of a more appropriate time in our history where nuclear should be considered. You think about the baseload problems we have with increasing populations worldwide, not just in Australia. This is the time in our history where nuclear needs to be, at the very least, considered.
Oh, absolutely. And, I don't understand why there's this reflexive dismissal of nuclear. I think that a lot of it is driven by ideology, and there's a suspicion from some on the left, on the hard sort of green left, of anything that isn't seen as natural. So they love wind and solar because it's seen as natural. But because nuclear is an innovation, it's human technology, it's human ingenuity. It comes from our brains. It doesn't come, it's not some magic unicorn fairy dust. There's suspicion around it. So I think the deep motivation for suspicion of nuclear is suspicion of human ingenuity.
Which is sad. You think about how immature that proposal is, and you think about what South Korea is doing and some of the more technologically advanced countries, and we're lagging so far behind.
Japan wants to have 9 nuclear plants up and running by the end of this year. China plans on building 150 nuclear plants over the next 15 years. Now that's 10, on average 10 a year. I mean, if China can do it, if Japan can do it, if France can do it, if the US can do it, why can't we?
Why can't we? And I think about, I've said this over and over again, when is someone going to do a proper scientific logistical study that shows us or tells us when we can turn on all the renewables and keep the lights on? What date is that?
Yeah.
Can someone please do the scientific due diligence that is not being done? Because all we do is, this sounds like a really good date. Yeah. How about we reduce it by 43% by 2030 and then 50% by 2050? Based on what?
Yeah.
And I just think that we're going to get to 2030 and get to 2050, Claire, and we come to the realisation we should have adopted nuclear because we can't create baseload power to that degree.
Yeah, and the reality is we're going to have to go back to coal. The renewables aren't going to do it. They're not going to cut it. We're going to go back to coal, and it will have been a massively missed opportunity because we didn't take the decision now to adopt nuclear.
And for small nuclear reactors, you know, you talk about the new technology. I've been in touch with Rolls-Royce on this, who are making them, one of the companies making them, and they tell me that countries like Australia are prime geographical nations that should use SMRs because if we've got a manufacturing base in Rockhampton or a far-flung area away from our cities, they can all be powered by something that sits on the back of a truck.
Yeah, and if you think about it, I mean, we've got the natural resources, we've got uranium, we've got thorium, you know, the jobs that would be created from a new industry, the expertise, the technical expertise, the managerial expertise. I mean, it's a massive opportunity. Only a backwards, parochial nation would dismiss an entire technology because of some outdated fears that have been proven to be incorrect.
But the times that I hear Jim Chalmers and Chris Bowen answer questions about nuclear, they are not referring to the new technology. They're referring to massive nuclear reactors that exist in places like France.
Yeah, I think a lot of the decision-making around climate policy in this country is quite inward-looking, and they're not looking at what's happening in countries overseas, and they're not looking at some of the failed experiments. So Germany is a massive lesson to the rest of the world. California is another example of a region which went hard into renewables, but which has had all sorts of unintended consequences, sky-high electricity prices, increasing poverty because people can't pay their electricity bills. There's all of these second-order effects. And so these second-order effects need to be taken into account when making decisions. It's not good enough to just look at a CSIRO report. We have to look at the bigger picture here.
Yeah, Claire Lehmann, you make a great deal of sense. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.